Amy, thanks for coming on the show.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and so there's so much to dig into here, but I think my first question is you know a lot about branding and about naming. So, what's the story behind the name of Wild Coffee? That's kind of a cool one.
Thanks. Well, actually, wild coffee was a plant that was growing natively outside my house in Miami. So I was in this part of Miami called Coconut Grove. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's super jungly. Like you have to have a machete as part of your tool shed. And when I was starting the consulting business and looking out at this plant that grew, it's hardy, it's beautiful, it's fast growing. And then I thought it also sort of had some fun brand extensions in play with, brewing ideas and energy. And that's why we chose it.
Yeah, it's incorporating coffee is always good because people generally have fond feelings about their legal drugs and these things, right? So
Yes.
it makes sense. And with that in mind, like what have you? Let's just start there. Like, what have you learned about what goes into an effective name? Like, what's in a name in your experience?
Oh, naming in this climate is really tough. Yeah. If you start to do knockout searches with trademarks, I mean, there's a lot that's taken. So really having something with stopping power that's not completely neological, right? A word that you make up, you have to spend a lot of money to tell that story, right? As suggestive brand names get a little bit descriptive. So I think, finding something that makes sense, that's not just so out of the box that you then have to spend sort of years and millions sort of telling the story of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, for us, I think I've thought kind of along the same lines when we or the royal we when thought of sales schema like back in 2014. Now I was like, oh, there's nice alliteration, and it's something that I can move around with. You know, if I end up in one niche and then go to another, it'll move with us. At the same time, it's sort of like has been one of these things where we've really had to lean into the word sales and the idea of sales not being a dirty word and all these things. So that's had to be kind of like a conscious decision that I think started from the beginning. So it's kind of weird. Like you want to pick something it seems like that has enough navigability, if that's the word, but is also memorable and everything like that. So
Right.
that's
And
what
then
I learned from
domains,
it.
right? Are
Yep.
they important when you're naming now or are they not? Right. Because everybody's entering a company name or searching for you in a search window. So how much does that matter? I'm hard pressed to think that Chime named their challenger bank Chime purposefully. Like sometimes I believe people are really saying what 5-letter domains are out there.
Yeah, it seems like that's something that is probably overvalued in my opinion. Because it's just like there's so many ways to be memorable without having to just lean on a few letters or a few words. And it seems
Right,
like
exactly.
eventually, like if you get a moat around your business, like your Google, then you kind of have this survivorship bias where you're like, oh, you need something really fanciful, but but then also that can work against you for so long because
Well, yeah, and then it sort of feels like you're trying to be too clever,
yeah.
right? And then we're all trying to sort of appeal to pretty wide audiences. We recently named a bank that is niche but going national and is going to have a few branch locations because they have a federal charter and they have sort of a narrow target but they don't. So it's really trying to straddle so many different sort of markets and people and appeal to them at the same time while being memorable. So it's challenging in this environment for sure.
Yeah, and let's get into that a little bit. So you're running, what you would describe, if I have that right, as a marketing consultancy. And I just love to understand, like in your opinion, what is the main difference or differences between an agency and a consultancy these days?
Well, for us, I mean, I've spent 28 years on client side. So until I started this firm, I had only worked in-house, in a CMO role, VP of marketing role, same as my business partner, who has also 25 years. And he owned one agency. So we just sort of see in this environment between maybe 10 and $50 million in revenue, everybody needs a CMO. And not everybody can afford one full time. And not everybody necessarily needs one full time, but it's that strategy piece of really sort of aligning yourself with an executive team and really digging into the growth targets and goals in the business. And that's where we sort of find our niche. We go to the weekly meetings of a lot of our clients, executive meetings. So we are very clear on revenue numbers. We are very clear on their goals, and we're super close to their staffs too. So we don't have a CMO hiring us to execute on a strategy. We're actually developing the strategy as CMOs, and then we can implement in-house. So we're like CMOs running our own agency that we own, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. So there's a couple questions there. I guess you mentioned that at that 10 to 50 million range, people need a CMO, companies need a CMO, but they don't usually have one. So what is usually there? Like, how are they usually handling these things if they don't have a CMO?
It's interesting. Sometimes we have actually encountered that the CEO has hired a couple of, maybe a digital agency to keep the website going, maybe a content person, and they're running it that way. Otherwise, it's a one-person show. We recently, we just signed a new client actually last week, a financial services firm that had one person who was hiring a lot of freelancers. She reports to the CEO, and she just could not really execute cohesively. So there was maybe somebody doing PPC, somebody keeping the website, a copywriter over here, a social media person, and then there's no sort of cohesive strategy and voice and speed, right? We all know that we all need to be turning out a lot of content really quickly. And that was a challenge for her. So typically a CEO may have an agency on the side, or an in-house person is managing a lot of freelancers.
Right. That makes sense. So then, a company like yours is coming in and kind of filling that CMO void. So it sounds like that's something that's pretty intensive. My guess is you're not going to be infinitely scalable and have like dozens and dozens of clients doing this. So can you talk about that a little bit? Like, what was your decision to go the depth route instead of the breadth route?
Well, we actually started with the breadth route, right? Because we were saying, oh, well, this was 3.5 years ago. Things are easy to systematize. We can launch campaigns for clients at scale. Let's hedge and make sure we don't get stuck in a situation where we have one client that has a disproportionate amount of our revenue. I think we've all sort of been there at different points in our careers. But what we found is so much is custom. Even if it's a 5-person, say, RIA advisory firm, small financial services firm, you really need to approach things uniquely in depth with really good strategy, right? Because otherwise you're not going to win. And so slowly we started having higher retainers, started having bigger revenue clients. And then we realized, we have to go this route, sacrifice some of the scalability to be able to do work that's really meaningful with sophisticated companies in a way that we think we can make a difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how is it going so far? Like, do you guys think you made the right choice? Do you like, how much do you like digging in and having just a few clients versus the idea of like, well, maybe I could hire somebody else to handle this and I could go to the beach or something? Like, how are you liking the experience so far?
The entrepreneur's dilemma, right? I founded this company because I had a life change and I wanted flexibility to raise my sons. And then I haven't taken a day off in 3.5 years, sort of thing.
Right, exactly.
That happens to us, right?
Yeah.
I'm really glad with where we are because we have 15 full-time employees. We freelance or we outsource development. That's the one area that we don't have in-house. And we have a really good partner on the other coast of Florida from where I am. But the quality and the long-term nature of our retainer clients is where the security comes, right? So we're signing 18-month agreements in many cases now that our retainers maybe 8 to 10 times where we were when we started. So the ability for us to scale the revenue and the retainer has been, I think, really successful. And then, our pipeline has to be full all the time. So that's how we sort of keep that going. If you're not always selling as an agency firm owner, then you don't have a business. But I really love the quality of the work. It gives us a little bit more space to be free and to dig in and to do persona work and branding and strategy. And it's gone really well, I think.
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of agencies that would like to be in a position like yours where they're have fewer clients maybe that are really good and they're handling more things. And I think one of the biggest challenges is convincing somebody to let you kind of take over everything, from the beginning, right? So can you talk about that a little bit? Like, how are you positioning this? Are you actually coming in and saying, hey, we're going to be a better, faster, cheaper CMO, or is there some other way that you're kind of putting this forward at the beginning?
Well, we say, when we're talking about sort of our core value that we provide, it sounds a little weird, but we really make executives feel safe. And that is that that they can entrust us to outsource the entire marketing function of their company. And it's a longer sales cycle, of course, right? We can talk a little bit about that, but we really, at our core, have to deliver what we say we're going to deliver. We have to demonstrate up front that we're capable. It doesn't always matter that we have industry experience. It helps, right? There are a couple areas that we specialize in, we're really good at, but we really had to set up sort of an onboarding process that allows us to dig in really quickly and really establish trust with a CEO. And in many ways, it's a cost factor for them. You have a 4-person marketing team that you have to carry overhead and manage, and that's $500,000 plus. We can do that for less. And CEOs sometimes don't even know how to manage the digital function of their company, right? Because it's so specialized now. So there's a lot of that happens.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think that from my experience, it's sort of like there's been such a massive swing towards specialization and towards like, oh, there's social media, there's so many different channels, and there's so many different widgets and different skill sets and all these different things, and then the whole idea of an organization being nimble and having to manage like dozens of agencies. Like we've had Shelley Lattimore from Nestle on the podcast, and she was talking about juggling like 20 agencies or something. I might have that wrong, but now like I'd love to hear your thoughts on where you think that pendulum is going. Like maybe it's swinging back the other way now, and people are like, okay, enough's enough. Like I will pay a lot more to have somebody just take care of this. And maybe we're going back to the Mad Men days, hopefully in a more politically correct way,
Yeah.
where you have like a big agency, handling a lot more things. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and just kind of where it's going.
Yeah, sure. It's consistency is important. I think agency management is a skill on the client side. It's interesting. Our team, they're senior. Most of them are director level above who we hire as consultants, because I can't pitch a client and then send in people with 3 to 5 to 8 years of experience in marketing. It's you get a VP level person. And when we're hiring them from client side, I say, how do you see your agency relationship now that we've sort of lifted the curtain? And sort of the level of transparency that we provide, we have to, right? If you're outsourcing us, if we're part of your team, truly, there are no secrets. We're transparent about what things cost us. We're transparent about our pricing model, right? That this is our overhead. This is how I'm covering the salaries and the hours that you get. We build some margin in, right? So we're not in a high margin business for sure. And I really think that people feel more comfortable with a team they trust that can handle SEO, all aspects of digital, all of your content writing, all of your design and branding. And then we actually create more work for ourselves because we're in-house marketers essentially. So we're opportunistic. Where do we need to take this? Where is this idea? Have you thought about geo-targeting this area and let's do some geo-fencing in this event? So we're actually creating more work. And we really try to operate as a true sort of team that's inside but outsourced. Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit. I remember in the early days of Sales Schema, doing sales calls from coffee shops and getting a lot of pushback. Like, hey, you're just a few people, spread out different places trying to build this business from from weird little corners. Like you're not in one place. You say you're in New York, but you have other people that are in California or somewhere else. And then that objection just started like slowly declining. And then when COVID hit, it just like reduced to nothing.
Fell off, right?
Yeah, it fell off. So I'd love to hear about that, like how closely that maps to your experience and and maybe we can segue to what it's like managing a remote team from there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, absolutely. We never thought it made sense to have a centralized office when we were spending time on site with clients. So that was sort of the model in the beginning, is not only do you get to work with the principals of the firm, Solomon and Amy, but we'll actually come and do meetings in person and then talk about lack of scalability, right? I mean, I was driving from Naples over to the other coast of Florida every week, and they really got used to seeing us in person. Then COVID happened. Then I started hiring in Seattle, New York, Virginia, Dallas, Boston, so I could hire the best team. And then I think we all became sort of placeless, right? Everyone's, people, it's actually, I don't even know that people even ask where I am anymore. And they're much more comfortable on Zoom. We run our meetings that way. And then once a quarter, we're flying. So I'll be in Nashville in June. We'll head up to New York. So great to do in-person meetings again, right? But I just don't think that people really think about where you are in this sort of placeless world now.
Yeah, and it's become such a better like inspiration for pleasantries than just the weather or something, right? Where it's like it almost like fits that slot where it's like, where are you? I've been there. I've gone here for these reasons, and
Right.
Exactly. So, and with that, what have you learned about best practices for like building culture and managing a team and all that sort of thing? I'd love to compare notes on that.
Sure. I'm interested in your experience about that too. It has to be deliberate. I mean, from the beginning, I think having core values, and I know that sort of values, it's not something I think that is talked about as much, but it's something that's really important to us. We hire based on them. We manage based on them. We're very clear about what we expect from our team. And so a lot of that is also based on kindness and really understanding, who the human being is on the other side of that screen. I wonder if we can get dehumanized in this sort of two-dimensional world sometimes. And especially when COVID hit, right? I had employees who had toddlers and no daycare, financial stress on everyone. So I was very glad that we had been very deliberate about the flexibility, about sort of humanizing our team and really getting to know them and building everything based on kindness. Everything hit and we were very, very close. And we were able to sort of weather a lot of this together,
Yeah. I mean, for us, and one thing that I've sort of been focusing on is like, usually, you get used to like a sales call or client call or something where you might have like 5 minutes of pleasantries. And then if you're a busy, leader and you're dealing with other busy people, then you kind of like, okay, let's get to work now kind of thing. And what I've had to realize is that on team calls, like it doesn't have to be that same thing. Like if people want to talk about personal things for 10 or 15 minutes, that's probably a good thing, So, and I've sort of just had to like be like, all right, let's let this go a little longer, and we don't always have to just get to work immediately. So sometimes that just means blocking off more time. But that's sort of like what I've been focusing on, because it's hard to just like impose a culture or say like, yeah, this is our mission statement and that sort of thing. I think you kind of have to let some things happen organically. That doesn't sound too buzzwordy. Yeah,
absolutely. We review our team every 90 days. And it's a really cool review format that we have. It's really asking them on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your energy level? And if it's not a 10, what do I need to do to support you to get there? What do you want to start doing more? What do you want to stop doing? We do goals by quarter, and it's a really open conversation that checks in with them. So it's not sort of an annual review. It's every 90 days getting a pulse of where your team is. And we take that really seriously. And I think that's been really helpful too, as people are, distributed to really sort of stay in touch about what expectations are. How are you doing? And maybe the 7 is just circumstances with COVID. Maybe the 9 is because they got to take on more responsibility with a project or a client. And then I get an insight into sort of what they like and what they do. And I think that's really important when you're not seeing each other all the time.
Right. That's really, really, something that's very important to keep top of mind. And I think that a big thing that we've always like struggled with is what channels to use for what thing, and we finally like bit the bullet and got Slack, even though I was kind of like ambivalent about it for so long, because it can just be such a distraction.
Why didn't you like it? What?
I never disliked it horribly, but I just felt like I never could figure out where it slotted in, because I was like, it's too bantery, so it's not really a good place for getting things done, and at the same time it's not really going to replace like real social interactions. I just could never figure out where it fit. So maybe we could start there. Like how have you guys used Slack and other things?
Well, I love Slack, and then we ended up using the application from inside of our project management software. So I resisted, and I'm a pretty easygoing, I'm an intense easygoing person, but I really didn't like that transition into this chat. It's very similar. We definitely have a channel by client. We have a company-wide sort of channel. And then we do use it a lot, and it's actually inside the project management software. So you can easily send links and projects and things that you're actually working on. So it feels like you're working in that environment. We use the company-wide one infrequently, but I do recognize personal milestones. We have had some of our employees have children graduating from high school this week and last week. So we do a lot of that. For the quick conversations, the challenge is it is expected to be immediate. So I don't like that sort of tether on the team, like that it makes them obligated to answer really quickly. So I am cautious about that. But it is something that we're in and using quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is just simply turning off notifications, and all these platforms fight so hard to just keep those on at all times. Hey, if you do this, the world's going to blow up or something, but it doesn't have to be like that. And then shifting to the client side a little bit, I'd just love to hear, you've worked at Calvin Klein, New York Times, huge clients. My guess is that's probably a huge advantage that you've been on the client side for so long. I think that a lot of agencies have never, a lot of agency leaders have never been in that position. So to start there, how did you go about selecting agencies when you were on the client side, and how has that transitioned into your consultancy now? That experience?
Well, sure. I mean, looking at capabilities for sure, but a lot of times we would go, even at iVillage when we were doing big pitches. There was so much sort of pitch and creative and spec work done then, sort of looking at the big agencies and having them come in on that front. Now I feel like things are moving so fast that we don't have time or the wherewithal to do that anymore. Right. So I think the process was a lot slower. You were choosing from big firms. I think that name meant more and client roster meant more than it does now. We're up against a pretty established firm right this afternoon, actually, in a pitch environment. And it really just depends on how much you gel with the person, because these projects are super integrated with the senior team, and whether or not somebody wants to be in a boutique environment where people will be very flexible for you versus getting put into a process with a big creative team, right? With a super tight scope, and this is what we're going to deliver in this time frame. With us, we're very sort of fluid and nimble. So I just think the whole environment has changed so much that in terms of speed and really sort of trusting that these agencies are going to deliver, because we're not doing a lot of spec work and discovery up front. We're charging for war room days now.
Yeah, and that's a good thing, and I think that more and more agencies are getting there. And to shift gears to the new business side a little bit, without going into details you can't go into, what did it take, for example, to use this as a case study to get to a pitch today with this company?
Well, our referral sources, right, that have been really strong. So either prior engagements from our client side, I've been in the workforce for 28 years. So you do build some good relationships over that many years. This pitch this afternoon actually came from some of the development firms that we work with, right? So outsourced CIOs will get brought into environments to sort of rebuild the tech stack and the technology part, and then they need to rebuild the front end with a brand. So we're going in today really just to show relevant client work, get to know each other, and we really want to get to know them. I mean, we do long-term engagements in many cases. We don't do as much project work. So it is a big commitment for us. It's almost like a job interview over 3 or 4 days. And then we like to meet in person, because I really don't think if we're going to sign a 12-month engagement, 18-month engagement, either side is really comfortable without spending at least a day together. And we're so glad that we can do that now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And to go kind of further up the funnel before that, and you mentioned outsourced CIOs and partners and that sort of thing. And I think a lot of our listenership is always trying to think about that. What are these hubs around that have the spokes that are going to create new business? So can you talk about that a little bit? How deliberate have you been in developing these partnerships? Are there any, is there a way tactically that you're handling new business and building that into everything else these days?
Sure. Well, since we're fractional CMOs, it makes sense for us to talk to fractional CIOs and CFOs, right? Because we're all in the same business of a company that's comfortable outsourcing a major function and role of a business. So we've definitely done some deliberate sort of outreach to other firms that do what we do, but in other areas. And we actually started an HR firm as well. So we have Wild Coffee HR, because we believe that's another really important part of a business that a lot of companies are comfortable outsourcing now. And we have somebody based in Boston who does that, everything from recruiting to handbooks to, employee crisis management. So we really see an opportunity there. So the outsourced CIO, CFO have just been really sort of fruitful partnerships for us. And also what's a little bit new for us and something I've always wanted is really to be on the bench of private equity firms, right? So if they're investing in firms that have a 3 to 5 year investment horizon, they're not just sort of doing cost cutting measures and managing the EBITDA, right? They care about the brand. They want to audit sort of what's happening on a marketing function. So we've gotten some pretty interesting engagements from PE firms nationally.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and it gels with what we're doing for a lot of clients. A lot of times we're getting them into PE firms and into like these third party, partnerships and that sort of thing. So in your experience, like what is a firm like that looking for in an agency? Like what boxes are they looking to check that are the same or different than what a brand directly might be looking to check?
I think the audit portion of that is important, right? Somebody who has enough experience across multiple industries that we know what a customer acquisition cost should be. We really understand efficiency and also team structure, right? We had an engagement over 2.5 years long where we managed an in-house team as consultants. So we were their marketing leadership, hired, outsourced. The team was full-time employees, but they trusted us enough to come in and say, oh, this is the team you need to build, right? So we're very clear on sort of what salaries you should be paying, what roles need to be in-house, what roles can be outsourced. So it's sort of marketing leadership versus actually carrying out the work, right? And building campaigns and creative. It's the team leadership and very clear sort of on metrics by industry that we can come in and say, oh no, you should do more of this, less in this area, and sort of build an organization this way. And our goal is really to work ourselves out of jobs, right, over time.
Right.
Because we would like for them to fly on their own. And then maybe what they'll do is sort of retain us just to come in and make sure that they're on track over a longer period of time.
Yeah, and it's funny because that's very similar to our value prop, I think. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that objection that I think has come up a lot, where it's like, well, there's certain things you should never outsource, right? You should always do yourself. How do you handle that? Like when you come across that?
Well, I think that as marketers, we're expected to go so wide and so deep now, right? You mentioned specialization before.
Right.
There are just so many different roles to fill that it's just not even feasible. And you don't need them full time, right? Like, do you really need an in-house SEO person at a technology company? Do you need a CMO? If you're at $5 to $7 million in revenue, do you need a full-time CMO? That can be expensive. Right. So I disagree with that because you just can't possibly have all of that in-house. And then if you do have maybe 1 or 2 people, then you have all these sort of disparate firms managing different aspects of the business. And then it doesn't become manageable that way either. I mean, do you agree?
Yeah, I think so. It's funny because, it just doesn't make sense when you add it all up that you're supposed to do all this stuff in-house. But I think, there's certain aspects where, of course, like, owners have to be involved. Like the thing that I especially disagree with, and I was playing devil's advocate a little with that question, is the idea that I hear a lot, even from people that I really respect in our world, that say, the owners should always be the ones to handle new business. And I just don't. I mean, to some degree, like I suppose that like the CEO of Amazon or Bezos when he was there, there's certain massive deals where probably they have to be involved, but not most of the time. And I think we hear that a lot. So this kind of drumbeat of, if you're an owner, you need to be the face of the agency. You need to be the one handling new business. And it just doesn't map with the way that every business has scaled. That said, it is probably like one of the harder things to get off your plate. That's going to take hiring somebody really good, getting them enough support, enough opportunity, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, it also gets a client ready, right? If I'm not involved in all of our clients all the time, right? Conversely, I'm not involved in a new business situation. I pitch and I leave, Right.
Right.
So it is sort of a blend that we do have involvement with our clients, especially on the strategy side, especially on special projects, like a big rebranding will be involved. But I also think it gets them ready. There are multiple people, from within an agency that you're going to be working with. And some of that may be on the in the new business development front when you first get started.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that. So can you talk about that a little bit? Like what's the right division of duties you found on the new business front?
Well, I do a lot of it, partially because I enjoy it. I think that, my business partner and I sort of do that together. First meeting is really just to sort of understand if they're a good fit and budget wise, does it make sense? Second meeting is where we bring in the specialists, right? So SMEs from digital, from branding, our creative director, content writers, we'll sort of form a little team and then get more into depth in that call. Again, we'll make sure that sort of budget is covered. And then when we kick off with an engagement, we are very clear sort of about, almost like a consulting firm would be. You'll have this much partner time, but we'll be on one meeting a month. We do weekly meetings with all of our clients, right? If you're an in-house team, you can't just get a project and leave and have milestone dates. It has to be a weekly cadence. So it gives us an opportunity, right, as owners to sort of be in and out. I can jump in meetings, say hi, touch base with clients, and so I think that sort of cadence has worked for us.
Yeah, that's cool. And I think touching on the weekly meeting thing, that's one thing we've gone back and forth so much about in our company is how often to meet with clients. Granted, we're not doing outsourced CMO work, so it's a little less intensive. But what did you have to go through to land on that weekly meeting cadence? And I guess the bigger question is, what's the right meeting cadence overall for something like this? How do you figure it out? Because sometimes it's like clients are too busy and it feels redundant. Other times, you could drop off and not communicate enough, and that's a worse problem. So it's a hard thing to land on in my experience.
It is, and it's a big commitment, right? To meet with clients every week. I think the pressure that my team felt was that they always had to have some sort of show and tell every week, that they had to be presenting creative. And I still feel like sometimes they'll fall into that. We don't have a lot to show this week. And I said, guys, I had to normalize that for them a little bit, that it is not about show and tell. We are very standardized with we use Smartsheet. We really love it for managing sort of all of our work that comes out of project management software. But it's really just to keep that rhythm going every week. And we really try to shoot for half an hour. It never happens. But we'll try to put it on the calendar for a half an hour. A lot of times it'll go an hour and 15. But I think that that's sort of how you keep the rhythm and the communication going with our model.
Right.
If you're doing a big project or a big website, maybe that's not required. But if you want to have an outsourced team and you're going to trust us, I think that the weekly cadence, and of course, there are other conversations that happen, but I think it really works for us.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
What did you end up settling on? Do you do weekly? Do you do as warranted, or?
So there's definitely communication happening throughout the whole week and reports and this sort of thing. But we actually settled on monthly because we just found that, our clients are so busy with the prospects we're getting and with like managing a sales process and all this stuff. And it also just takes enough time to get, statistically significant data to make decisions, that when we were meeting like every 2 weeks, it'd be very much of the moment. Like this thing's going really well, let's double down on it. This thing's going wrong, let's get away from it. When it's like, you just need a little more time with what we do. Yeah.
Right. And
so
we're processing so much so fast. So there's always something to talk about. I just, so that makes sense that you really need to sort of cater your meeting cadence. But I think the most important thing is that you have one, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's monthly, if it's a daily stand-up. When we were managing the in-house team of a client, we had daily stand-ups every day at 9, 15 minutes, big touch base with the team. What's happening? What are your roadblocks? Where can we help you? What's on tap for today? And that's how we managed that. So that was actually daily.
Yeah. So with that, weekly's not so bad, I guess. So,
exactly.
Yeah, makes sense. And kind of like getting towards the end of the time and shifting gears a little bit and going a little personal. I know that you have a family as well, and I just love to hear kind of how you've balanced everything and challenges you've gone through, between managing a family and working with all these brands and so on.
Well, I think that working from home is really helpful. I think summers are tough. I know a lot of people right now, we're all facing the end of the school year and the children are actually in the house while we're in the house. So I think just being organized and really sort of planning ahead for them. I have two teenage athletes. One travels nationally for a sport. One is more sort of local to the state of Florida. So I really think that closing the door and being very communicative about like, this is my office, and they're very cautious and, sort of conscientious about that. And as teenagers, having the food planned. I underestimated, and I don't know if you did this in high school, but it's like living with human garbage disposals with the amount of food that I prepare. So that's been like one of the biggest things. And I think my kids have learned to be really resourceful since they were 11 and 14. When I started this company, they've had to be on their own a bunch. And I think that's been really helpful in an age of helicopter parenting, to have kids. It's like, well, guys, I'm your single parent and off we go. And I think that it's really made them aware and very responsible and sort of respectful of what I've been trying to do.
Yeah. I remember that from the other side. I'm the oldest of three boys and we're all large organisms and everything. and
just the volume of food.
Yeah, it's a lot. I can imagine. And I mean, I feel like our older millennials and then like the generations before us are just much more latchkey-ish, So it's changing, especially now with like everybody being home. So, but I feel lucky. Like I'm glad I got to kind of grow up with that autonomy and everything. And I probably ate really badly though. It's good that you can be there to like at least guide what they're eating because we would just do crap funny. So much. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I did too, right? Little Debbie cakes. We just had a conversation about this the other day. Little Debbie cakes, bagel bites. Like my mom just sort of had it in the freezer. So at least I have a little bit more control about what's happening. And I think they're much more aware of nutrition, especially as athletes. My son was just recruited. He's at 14. He's going to live with a family in Orlando to play for Orlando City FC.
I'm sorry. I should know this. This is soccer though. You're talking about
soccer. Okay, yeah. So cool. MLS now, well, we had an amazing game, USA versus Mexico. We won 3-2 last night. It was a big deal. And so now he's going to live away from home. And it's interesting that soccer is starting to recruit nationally, but they are much more aware of nutrition. I think that it was lucky that I was building Wild Coffee during his childhood, because I think it really prepared him mentally, that he's a pretty mature kid at 14, that he's ready to do this. And I love that our kids are getting to witness our work in many ways. It's not such a black hole with mom or dad sort of leaving the house and going to an office. Like they hear me on Zoom calls. They know when I'm a guest on a podcast and, to please stifle the dogs and pray the mailman doesn't come to the door,
Well, it's funny because around quarantine, like back in March, I visited my parents. It was a long story. I was in Argentina and then just wanted to be out in New York for a little while. So I was there for about a month. My dad is a lawyer. So he was actually on official court proceedings, like within the house. And that was a big deal because, you'd have to really block off that room and then the dog would wander in and all this stuff would happen in like the middle of a deposition or something. So
yes, I've shoved towels under the door. Yeah. I mean, I've gone to extremes, like towels under the door. I've hired dog walkers to get them out. And I think we're all sort of forgiving about life. I have had a shirtless teenager come in before and I'm wildly waving for him. No, I'm on a call.
Yeah, I think everyone's definitely more forgiving about it now, which is a good thing. So that's great. Yeah, Amy, it's just so much fun. Thanks for coming on. And how can people get in touch with you, follow what you're up to?
Absolutely. Well, wildcoffeemarketing.com is our website, and I'm Amy Anderson at Wild Coffee on LinkedIn. And so yeah, that's where people can see sort of samples of our work and what we're up to. And this has been a lot of fun for me, Dan. Thank you so much.
Likewise. And hopefully we'll do it again. So appreciate it.
Sounds great.